In this series, what we're focusing on is how our marriages can be better and how God uses them to make an impact on other people in the world. And I ended last week with a definition, which I was glad to see many people writing. There's a lot of definitions about marriage. Here's one I read this week. Marriage is when a man and a woman become as one. The trouble starts when they try to decide which one. We're going to talk about that today. But here's the one we settled on. Marriage is a covenant relationship where two spiritual friends help each other on their journey to become who God designed them to be. God's purpose was to create two different people with different qualities and abilities that would come together to complement each other so that together they could serve one another and serve God. We see this at the very beginning when Adam is asleep and God takes the rib and He creates Eve, and Adam wakes up, and I love his first words, "At last." This is what I've needed. That horse and dog, and we're really cool, but this is what I've needed. He says, this one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman because she is taken from man. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother, listen to this language, is joined to his wife, and the two are united as one. Now the man and woman were both naked, but they felt no shame. Listen to the language of connection there. They're joined together, united as one. That is God's intent. And it says here that they were naked and not ashamed. In other words, they were open, they were vulnerable. Nothing was hidden, nothing was covered up. Everything was perfect and pure. And it's had some problems since then. But this is the ideal that I believe God wants to restore us to. And it's the ideal that He wants in our marriages. And today, I want to focus on the challenges of merging two people into an aligned relationship where they can really love and serve each other in God. And again, if you're single today, this is really just as much for you as anybody else. Plus, a lot of what I'm going to share is going to apply to any relationship you're involved in, especially as we get into the discipleship part of this. So hang in there with me. Don't check out because you say, well, I'm not married. No, this is going to help you too. Now, even though we're different, and we're going to talk about in a little bit some of the differences between the way men and women are wired and the challenges that creates, there are certain things, though, that as human beings we need. Remember last fall I did that series called Transformed where we talked about brain science and how it relates to our spiritual growth. And one of the things I talked about was how important a good attachment was when we're born. When we're born, we desperately need to be unconditionally loved. And if we get that from a primary caregiver, a parent, we will grow up healthy. If we have good attachment, it will affect all of our relationships. We'll be able to attach to friends, co-workers, a spouse, and to God. But if in the first 2 years of life we don't have that good attachment that brings confidence and joy back and forth. Remember, we talked about Alan Shore out at UCLA in his research. And he said what the brain wants more than anything else and what it thrives on from the moment we're born, and this is his phrasing, is joy. We want joy. And he defined joy as someone that is happy to see me, someone that accepts me and loves me. And so a child looks for that, and we get it through the eyes and the eye connection with the parent before we can actually communicate or comprehend what they're saying. If we don't get that in the first 2 years of life, if we don't have that good attachment, if we're not unconditionally loved, we won't know what love is. And every relationship throughout the rest of our life will be limited. Not getting from our parents what we should have gotten, that love, that unconditional love and acceptance, is what we call A trauma. There's A trauma and B trauma. If you'll remember, we talked about A trauma, not getting what we should have. B trauma are the bad things that happen to us. That's when we get abused, neglected, betrayed, abandoned. Trust is broken. And that can happen throughout life. And if we have this A or B trauma and we take this into a marriage, then we're always going to be limited and we're always going to be guarded. And it's going to be difficult to open our lives to somebody else. So that's baseline. Now, the good news is, if you have experienced A trauma or B trauma, we can help you with that. In fact, you need outside help for that, because your spouse typically can't help you. We always talk about A trauma is actually harder to get over. B trauma, you can go back to when you were loved unconditionally as a child and relate to that. A person with A trauma has no reference point of unconditional love. So they've never experienced it. What are you going to do with a person like that? You're talking about a term that is vague to them. But we can help you. We can counsel you. What we can do is help you if you've had A or B trauma. We can help you find healing because we can help you connect to God unconditionally. Like I said, a spouse can't do that. If a spouse tries to help you, it'll be seen as criticism and an attack. So you'll just close yourself off more. So you can go to a psychologist and pay a lot of money, and hopefully over a number of years, you can get some freedom. Or you can come talk to Tan or I. We can help you a lot cheaper and a lot faster. Because God really wants to connect with you. And He wants to heal those wounds from the past. I love what Psalm 147, verse 3 says. If I can find it here. He heals the wounds of every shattered heart. That's what God offers us. Healing for shattered hearts. Most people that find themselves in trauma, they didn't get there because they wanted to. They're a victim. But what we can do is help you to get past that. Because again, if you don't get past that trauma, nothing else that you do will put you in a place where you can really have the kind of depth of love that a marriage needs and the trust that is there to make it a great marriage. So we start with God's unconditional love. Now, even though, let's say we got two healthy people, they're healed, they're whole, they're going to get married, there's still a lot of differences, aren't there? We are different in how we think. Now I'm going to share a bunch of things with you of how we're different, but I always have those people go, well, I'm the outlier, I'm different, I don't believe that. Well, for about 80% of men, this is going to be right, and about 80% of women, this is going to be accurate. If you're the other 20%, well, God bless you. Good for you. I mean, that's great. You know, you're probably the opposite of your spouse anyway in that area. That's usually the case. God does put opposites together, and I think it's just to shape us into the image of Jesus. So we're different in a lot of ways, even physically. Men, for example, men have about 1 million more red blood cells in every drop of blood than women do. And we think that contributes to endurance and being able to work and doing hard labor. Men have about 1.5 gallons of blood in their bodies. Women only have about 4/5 of a gallon. Isn't that interesting? And not sure why. Men, about 40% of their weight is muscle, and women, it's about 20% on average. But women have this insulating layer of cells in their body that's really unique. And we think that relates to childbirth and caring for children and being healthy. A lot of our differences are in our brain. And for example, let's put up our brain slide here. And if you remember, we talked about this last fall. Brain's divided into two hemispheres. The left hemisphere controls language, numbers, analytical thinking, and so on. The right side is more emotional. It's more relational, imagination, emotional intelligence, expression, and so on. And we tend to focus on different areas of the brain. In fact, men tend to live so much on this side that in studies, they very seldom access this side. They're kind of half-brain. We are, guys. Where women tend to think bilaterally. You have the corpus callosum in the brain that controls information going back and forth. And in an fMRI, a functioning MRI, they can monitor what's going on inside somebody's brain while they're living. And for women, that callosum is just going zzz, and information's going back and forth, all this. And with men, it's like primarily just on the logic side, which is really interesting because with women, there's a lot of activity. And they've actually measured men sitting still, and they've measured no brain activity. They really can. Men have the ability, and it's an ability, to think about nothing. Absolutely nothing. So when your wife says to you, "What are you thinking about?" You go, "Huh? Nothing." And you think, "You just don't want to talk to me. You don't want to tell me what you're feeling." What? I'm not feeling anything. Leave me alone. Let me go back to what I was thinking about. Nothing. That's the way we are. And that helps us. It helps us to be able to, focus and isolate issues. Women can process a lot more information back and forth, though, in that way. That's why women are great in small crisis. They can just be at the house and cooking dinner and being on the phone and dealing with kids, and I go in and go, "Whoa, this is crazy. I'll be out in the garage." Guys can't handle that. But come a big crisis, guys tend to be a little better in that setting. Men tend to be a little more objective, and women tend to be more personal or subjective, and that's good. It's our view. And again, when these complement each other, it's a wonderful thing. Men tend to get their identity from what they do. If a guy introduces himself, he'll get around to what he does for a living. He'll talk about his job. A woman, when she introduces herself, will talk about her family because it's a different value, different focus. Men tend to be more headline-oriented. Women tend to be fine print. So men aren't big on details. Like my daughter will call from California about every day. And if I pick up the phone, I go, "Hey, how you doing?" She goes, "Good." I go, "Great. Here's your mom." Yeah. And then Lori will talk to her for an hour, and then she'll reduce it to about 5 minutes and update me. But then if Faith is in a crisis, she'll call for me. Because she didn't want to have to go through all the emotions and all the questions that Lori's going to ask. I'll say, "What's going on?" She'll say this. "Okay, let's talk about it." Because we just have different strengths. It doesn't make one better than the other. It just makes us different. Now, like I said, this isn't true in all situations. Now, even though the language center is on the right side, expressing of that language is on this side. So men, we know how to talk, we just don't talk. The average man speaks about 12,000 words a day. The average woman speaks about 25,000 words a day. That means when the guy gets home, he's done. He already spoke his 12,000 words. He just wants to eat and sit in front of the TV. The wife, she's got half her words left. And now there's another adult in the room. So I want to use those. One guy said, "I haven't spoken to my wife in 6 months." His friend said, "How come?" He said, "I didn't want to interrupt." They measured little kids at play to prove this out. So you get little 4 and 5 years old, and they did a study on them. And whether they were playing by themselves or with someone else, 100% of the little girls' language was conversational. You could understand they were talking back and forth, either themselves or toy or to another person. The little boys in the same room, only 60% of their words were comprehensible. The rest were just grunts and noises. Bang, bang. That's how we are, you know. Women develop the ability to communicate and language much faster than guys do. This is why when I was a youth pastor, used to tell young girls all the time, do not place your self-worth in the hands of a 16-year-old boy who's not near as mature as you even. You're going to be in trouble. And sure enough, when they do that, they do. Because those guys know the woman's drive is for security and a man's drive is for sex. So what does he offer her? Security. And he does it through those three magic words. I love you. Pretty cheap on his part. What does the girl give in exchange? Her body. And so these are things that are really important for us to understand. Because if we understand how to guard and how to compliment and how to relate to somebody of the opposite sex, it makes a real difference in our life. All of this comes down to this point. It all comes down to right here. A wife looks at her husband and says, "Can we talk?" And the husband's response is usually, "What about?" Now here's what happens in that moment. They've each gone to a separate side of the brain. She just wants to talk, relationally, connect. Just be together, to converse back and forth. He, being a man, so she's on the left side of the brain. Him being a man goes to the other side. The right. He goes to the left side. She's on the right side. He goes to his side of the brain, and logic and reason, he's going to solve a problem. So when she says, "Let's talk," she's speaking out of her side of the brain. And when he responds about what, he's speaking out of his side, and the problem is they can't connect. And this is the essence of the communication problem that we all have. Because we're wired differently. So, what do? Well, men tend to offer women their best solution. You know, if Lori comes to me with a problem or she wants to come and talk, I go into mode of, okay, let's figure out. Let's go to all the libraries in my head because I love her and I want to help her because she wouldn't be talking to me unless there's a problem. Right? Because for men, there has to be a purpose in a discussion. Sometimes when Lori wants to talk, she just wants to talk. She doesn't know where it's going to go. That drives me crazy. Because I'm still trying to figure out where we are. And why we're not getting there faster. It's the same philosophy about shopping. When we go in the store, Lori goes up and down aisles that we don't even need anything in that aisle, but she just wants to browse and see what's there. When I go to the store, especially for her, it's like I think about when I get in my car, fastest route there. How can I park the closest? What's the fastest route to that item in the store? And then I get it, and then I calculate which line is the fastest to get out of. And I will look, and if a cashier is talking to someone, I'll go, I'm not getting in that line. This is not a pastoral moment. I'm on a mission. So, I get the thing, and I get home, and I walk in. And the greatest compliment I can get at that moment is when Lori says, "Wow, that was fast." And I go, "Yes, it was." I win. Now, she's not impressed by that. She's just acknowledging because she can't even relate to that. But that's how we're different. Now, women do the same thing. When their man is suffering, when he's going through something, she offers him her best solution. Let's talk about it. And he goes, I don't want to talk. No, you should really talk about it. I'd just rather not talk about it. No, you need to express your feelings. Don't keep them inside. I'm going to express something in a minute and you're not going to like it. So leave me alone. Because what we're trying to do for each other is offer what's best for us. Now, men, it's really, really important that we take the lead here. And what we do is we take the lead by humbling ourselves and we listen for emotions, not listen for the problem. Because when we listen for emotions, that validates how she's feeling. See? Now I'm teaching this. I'm not great at this. I am so left-brained that this is something I'm continually, my wife has such amazing grace to help me with this. But I'm learning. And one of the ways we can get skilled at listening for our wife's emotions and thus be on the same side of the brain with her and actually communicate and help her is to listen for what she's going through. Now, how do we do that? Because how do we get our brain out of that left side and get back to that right relational side when it's unfamiliar territory? It's like we don't want to leave that left side because we're familiar with that. We've mapped it all out. We know where everything is. We get over in the right side and boy, it gets weird over there. It's like we don't know where to go. We don't know where it's leading. It's just weird and awkward. But if we will be intentional about being more right brain in that conversation, it will help. So a couple things you can do. Remember last week, the joy tip I gave you was gratitude. The more grateful you are, the more thankful you are for your spouse, that's all right brain stuff. It's all emotional. It triggers good emotions. It triggers joy and gratitude is one of the first ways to get back to joy. And so if I'm thankful for Lori and I'm thinking about when we're even talking about all the ways I'm grateful for her, or if I show curiosity about her, so if I do it right, if I can capture my thinking, and when she sits down and says, let's talk, if I think, okay, I got to make this a puzzle to solve. It's a little left brain. But I go, I'm going to figure out what she's feeling. And by staying in gratitude and thankfulness for her and keep reminding myself how grateful I am to have her in my life and stay curious about how she's doing and really desire to help her, then it forces me into that right side of the brain. And I become more sensitive and I begin to listen for what she's going through emotionally. See? And this really helps. And if you don't know how to respond, just ask her, tell me what you're feeling. You know, psychologists make a fortune on that one question. How does this make you feel? You know? And it's a legitimate question because you're trying to get to what's underneath, what's the motives, what's at the core. That's where the problem is. And so if we're really going to help each other, we got to be able to get there. And men, in the same way, when your wife is asking you how you're feeling, you have to stop because men don't know how they're feeling. Sometimes it's just anger, but they don't really own that. They don't know. And so wives, help us with that. Just say, you know, I kind of sense you're pretty angry. That big hole in the wall next to you kind of gives it away. You know, is something bothering you, honey? And just being able to talk about those things. If you don't know how to respond, just ask. You know, especially men, we can ask, you know, what can I do to help you? Describe to me what's going on. And then just listen. And keep your mouth shut. And don't offer advice. That is so hard to do. But to be present for your wife and just listening will create more value to her and will validate her emotions more than if you try to solve the problem. Okay? Here's the bottom line. Women are just better at relationships than we are. So guys, let me just cut to the chase for you. If you want a better marriage and happier life, just ask your wife, what would it take for us to have a better relationship? Now, I know that takes some guts, and that's tough. But she's better at it. And if you're sincere and are willing to listen, then she'll tell you, this is what I think we need to do to have a better relationship. Again, we'll go back to our definition at the beginning. Marriage is a covenant relationship where two spiritual friends help each other on their journey to become who God designed them to be. So I want to quickly go through, because I was thinking about this and I thought, I think a lot of people aren't even sure. They've never had a spiritual friend. They've never had someone that they had a close spiritual relationship with. Ideally, that is your spouse and should be your spouse if you're married. But if you're not married, think about the other relationships in your life. Do you have mentors? Do you have peers that are challenging you and each other to grow in your faith? And so this applies to that as well. It applies to any relationship. This applies to your kids as you disciple them to become more like Jesus. 8 ways spiritual friends help each other. Number 1, encourage each other through honor and affirmation. Just to be able to say the words, how much you value them, and to encourage them, to affirm their value. Like the scriptures, be devoted, tenderly loving your fellow believers as members of one family. Try to outdo yourselves in respect and honor of one another. Don't always measure by who's doing it the most. If you're not getting as much as you want, give it more. Don't hold back, but give it more, because you remind that person the importance of that value because they feel it in their own lives. Number 2, challenge each other. Discover creative ways to encourage each other, it says in Hebrews, to motivate them toward acts of compassion, doing beautiful works as expressions of love. That doesn't mean condemn somebody or say, you jerk, why did you do that? Instead, we appeal to them and we say things like, I think you're better than that. That just wasn't you when you responded that way. I know you're bigger than that. You're better than that. I believe more in you. See? That way, it's an encouragement. You're challenging them, but you're also encouraging them that you believe the best about them. And when they don't reach that best, you're still there to help them. Number 3, you admit wrongs and offer and ask forgiveness. Are you one of those people that needs to pout for a while and punish the person? Or do you just quickly try to get it resolved? Again, I think I've said it every week in this series, but one of the marks of maturity is how quickly we repent. And that just isn't toward God, but that's to other people as well. Number 4, take steps to reconcile when you disappoint one another. So do something. Matthew 18 says, be proactive. Go after this. Don't just stay quiet. Tell them when they've hurt you. Well, they should know. Well, apparently they don't. And if they really love you, then they wouldn't have intended to hurt you. So they don't have a clue. Ladies, we don't have a clue sometimes. If we say something hurts you, tell us. And then we'll probably apologize right away because we didn't realize what we said was hurtful. Number 5, bear each other's burdens. Galatians 6, love empowers us to fulfill the law of the Anointed One as we carry each other's troubles. I remember a time when I had my company, when I was in business, And we went through a really tough season, and we didn't know if we were going to make it as a company. It was really tough. And a few things happened at the same time, and in fact, the world was caving in, and Lori and the kids are depending on me. I've got, like a whole bunch of franchisees as well as employees at our headquarters that are looking at me to solve this problem. And I was just overwhelmed. And I remember in one of those moments of weakness just telling Lori, I don't know if we're going to make it out of this. I'm really concerned. And Lori looked at me at that moment and said, you know what? As long as I have you, we can go through anything. Man, that lifted 1,000 pounds off my shoulders. Because I was more concerned about disappointing her than anybody in the world. And for her to say, yeah, we've got each other. That meant everything. It meant she was choosing me over my dumb mistakes or my ability to fix this or my ability to provide or anything else. And this is what the Bible talks about in Genesis 2 that we read, that couple joining together, being united as one. King James says clinging together. That's an important thing. Number 6, be there through thick and thin. You're going to see your spouse at their best, and you're going to see them at their worst. And that attitude of a spouse to believe their best and encourage their mate means all the difference in the world. Everybody wants to pile on. You have to be the one that encourages. Marriage has to be this vital sanctuary where we find help and encouragement. Number 7, sharing their goods and their very lives with each other if there's a need. You've so graciously, Paul said, provided for my essential need during this season of difficulty. I mean, we have to constantly invest in this relationship as friends. And it will be costly. And at times, you're going to want to pull out because you just feel like your dividend is not, or your investment is not paying dividends. But Dave Williams, what do you tell them when the market's tough and they're not getting their money back? Stay in there. It'll come back. Yeah. You don't give up. Dave does investments. It means something. Because the other alternative is to pull out. And the pain that causes. And the thought of starting over. And all of that. And to know that you're going to have the same issue probably with the next person. And I know sometimes that pain is so unbearable. And like I said last week, if you're in a place where you're being abused and so on, then you're not obligated to stay with that person. Maybe you have to step away so that you can both heal and get things restored. Number 8, it's important to experience God together. This is an area that couples, I think, really struggle in. Because our relationship with God is such a personal thing that sometimes it's difficult to share that with another person. And I think a lot of times guys struggle in this area in particular because it's a relational thing. Women generally are going to have a more intimate relationship with God than men do. And so men are intimidated by that. So we have to value the strength that each one brings to that relationship. Men carry this deep kind of underlying trust in God that once they have it, it's just not shaken. And women bring this energy and excitement and passion that we need. So we really help kind of cross-fertilize each other there. Paul says here in Ephesians 5:19, and your heart will overflow with joyful song to the Lord. Keep speaking to each other in words of Scripture, singing psalms and praises and spontaneous songs given by the Spirit. Paul is describing there this relationship where we share what the Spirit of God is saying to us with our spouse. So we are actually prophetically encouraging them. And when we say prophetically encourage, what we're really saying is we are seeing them through God's eyes. Because sometimes we don't see ourselves through God's eyes. We see ourselves through our failures, through our mistakes, and we just put ourselves down. But we are called to call each other up, to encourage each other and say, this is what I see in you. This is what God sees in you. You can do this. You are better than you think. You have strength inside of you. God has blessed you. He's working in you. It's not just a token prayer or reading a little devotional. That's a good thing. But it's actually experiencing God, like we said earlier in the service. It's about experiencing God together. And sometimes God will give me things for Lori as I'm praying or reading the Word or something like that, and she'll do the same. Those are the things that really provide that nurture. And when we allow God to function through us that way, God will put His finger on the exact thing your spouse needs that you might not have come up with on your own, but the Spirit of God is helping you. Now again, this applies to all relationships. It applies with your kids. It applies with your neighbors, your coworkers, your extended family. That ability to speak the words of God are so important. So, wrap it up this way. I want to encourage you this week to score your relationships here from 1 to 10 in each of these areas and celebrate where you're really good. And where you're not, just say, let's get better at that. Because any step forward in this area is a win. See? I had a couple come up the other day and we were talking about relationships and they were saying, what would it take for our relationship? They said, we're both would say our relationship's about an 8. Usually guys are about 2 points higher than the women. But that's on average. We're just a little more optimistic and not aware. But they said, we both agree that our relationship overall is about an 8. How could we get that to a 10? And I said, you don't want it to be a 10. I said, because a 10 is when you're in a crisis that is so bad that all you have is each other to cling to. And when the whole world is coming against you and it's life and death, then you know you've got that person there with you. That's when it's at a 10. You don't want to sustain that very long. You want to celebrate those moments, but you want it to dial down to about an 8. And that's where you want to be. So I encourage you this week, think about that. In fact, if you're not married, think about other relationships. And here's a good one. Singles, if you anticipate being married someday, I would encourage you to go through this and evaluate yourself. How am I doing in each of these areas? And how can I be better for the person that God has for my life?